Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Real World Perspectives on Poverty Solutions speaker series. This is our last lecture of the series this year. So I want to thank everyone for coming and being here in person, being present online. I also want to give a special shout out to Matt Weinberg from the School of Social Work, who's been helping us with the tech all semester long. So thank you, Matt. Really excited to have Norma Rey-Alicea with us here today, talking about how post-secondary credentials pay off for low-income students. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Mara Osvelt, who will introduce Norma.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Man, you made it. It's almost the end of the semester. So you guys can see the end of the light at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully it's not the end of the light. Another problem. But thank you guys. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm grateful for you guys all being here for throughout the series that Trevor organized. Thank you, Trevor, and that Carissa's helped kind of maintain, keep going, and publicize it. So thank you guys. Today we have a really, really special person joining us today, and it's really an honor to be introducing her. She joins us in her capacity as the founding director of Next Gen Talent, an organization dedicated to transforming the approach to post-secondary and career advising so that it boosts the labor market payoff of post-secondary credentials and improves early career outcomes for low-income students, students of color, and first-gen college students. But Norma's dedication and commitment to serving began far earlier than that. Prior to Next Gen Talent, she worked for Jobs for the Future, where she co-developed its Best Bet services, provided professional training and tools to help students find career pathways, meeting their interests, and filling regional employer needs. Earlier in her career, Norma served as a program director for the Hispanic Office of Planning and Evaluation, or HOPE, in Jamaica Plains. That's where she's from, if you guys know. It's a great place for ice cream as well in the Boston area. And there she designed curricula and managed tutorial and other support services for low-income Latinx students attending the Boston public schools. She's got not one, but 2 Harvard degrees because she's an overachiever like that. And she's a really close friend and someone I really have long come to admire and respect. So please join me in welcoming Norma Rey-Alicea. Trevor tried to say her name, but thank you. What's up, everybody? How are you? So I'm the last one to speak, huh? Well, I just first of all, good afternoon. I'm excited to be here and very thankful to Poverty Solutions, as well as to Business and Impact at the Ross School of Business for this opportunity. Thank you, Mara, for the very, very kind introduction. Luke and Trevor, I appreciate you for inviting me. I don't know if Luke is here. Is Luke here? Oh, okay, excellent. Hi, Luke, wherever you are. Trevor, I read actually that you have an extensive background in constructive theology, which sounds way less stressful than destructive theology. And since I'm talking about areas of study today, I think that was like a really good choice on your part. Congratulations. I also want to thank you for not making constructive behavior a prerequisite for me speaking today. Just yesterday, I was driving down Packard Street with Mara, and I had to think long and hard about what baby Jesus would do if he were stuck behind an Ann Arbor driving really, really slowly. I'm an East Coast girl, so I drive. I'm a little bit aggressive when I drive. And an Ann Arbor who drives so slowly, in fact, that I could actually find the time to solve problems during the ride. Anyway, hello everyone. My name is Norma. It's very nice to meet all of you. My name is Norma. That's my dad's fault. We'll talk about that later. I'm the executive director of Next Gen Talent, a nonprofit I co-founded in 2018 with my mentor and former colleague Sue Goldberger in Boston. How many of y'all have been to Boston before? It's a great place. Mara always tries to convince me that Michigan is not colder than Boston, and she's always wrong. But we keep that hope alive because I might move here one day. But anyway, Boston, as you all know, is the home of the Freedom Trail. I think you all know that. The first surgery using anesthesia. I don't know if you knew that. New Edition, y'all are too young for New Edition, but New Edition was the jam when we were growing up. And Duncan, whose coffee and donuts are like cocoa crack for a lot of people that I worry about. I could talk about cocoa crack more because I like alliteration, but I'm not going to keep through that because it turns out I'm here to talk about something else, which is just concerning. Sure.
Oh, can you, yeah.
Okay, so I should try and take this off. Sorry, guys, give me 1 second. Can you hear me now? Oh, better. Yes. So this is actually what I came to talk about originally, which is that, low-income students invest a lot of money and time in their post-secondary education, whether that's college or something else. And way too often, they're not getting a good return on that investment. I actually came to focus on this work in my life because of experiences I had when I was starting out in my career path. As Mara mentioned, I grew up in Jamaica Plain in Boston, which kind of my section of JP was a Latino Latinx enclave at the time. And I ended up after college deciding that I wanted to stay in my neighborhood to work. I wanted to dedicate my time to the place that helped to raise me to be who I am. And I ended up getting this job at this great Latinx CBO called Hope, where I directed tutorial services for low-income Latinx students, middle and high school students in the Boston Public Schools. And I really loved that job. It was one of my favorite jobs in life because I was able to teach, and I love teaching. I loved working with the college counseling team there as well. So I directed tutorial services, and then I worked very closely with the college counselors, we called them back then, that supported the students. What I didn't love so much about it was that years later, I would run into former students, and more than half the time, easily, I would get one of two stories that they would tell me. One was either that they had graduated from college, but weren't making enough money to pay their rent and student loans back. And this is like 4-year degree, right? College. Or that they had dropped out and had a ton of student loan debt on top of their heads. And I just kept thinking, like, what's happening here, right? Like something is going wrong in this situation and we need to figure it out. And the data support, right, this story. So for too many students, a college education just isn't paying off, right? So what we're finding in the research is that over 40% of 4-year college grads, not 2-year, 4-year college grads, don't land a good first job once they're out in the labor market after graduation. And most 5 years later are still underemployed. And so what I mean by this is that they're working in jobs that actually don't require the level of degree that they have, right? So if they're working in a job that might require like an associate's degree instead of a bachelor's. In addition, we're seeing that low-income graduates, college graduates, earn half as much as their higher income peers. And we're seeing, unfortunately, that the racial wealth gap is growing, right? We thought that getting a college degree was going to empower people of color to be able to gain more wealth, that we'd be able to narrow the racial wealth gap and the opportunity gap. And actually what we're seeing is that student loan debt is creating a dent in that dream. And so you can see from this chart here that between 1995 and 2019, you can see that the median net worth for a white college graduate actually rose from $114,000 to $138,000. But for a Black college graduate, it decreased significantly from $50,000 all the way down to $8,000. So how did we get into this hot mess of a situation? Well, there are a lot of reasons. And these are just some of them because we don't have time all day to talk about all of them. But I did want to point out, obviously, the high cost of college is one reason, skyrocketing student loan debt. The average college student is paying 59% more for things like tuition, fees, room and board than before. And wage growth just hasn't kept pace, right? So right now, what we're seeing is in the last few years, for example, if you have a bachelor's degree, wage growth is around 5%, like it's increasing around 5%. That's nothing compared to 59%, right? So the issue is like not making enough money and then student loan debt is this very terrible combination. We see that the average debt for someone with a bachelor's degree is a little shy of $29,000. And we're seeing that there are disparities by race and gender, right? So Black women in particular who've graduated from college with a bachelor's have a disproportionate amount of debt at over $41,000. And this stat really shocked me. It's a very sobering fact that the average Black borrowers still owed 95% of their original loan amount after 20 years compared to white borrowers who are on average had paid off most of their student debt. So you can see that race plays a big role as it does in many things. And the stat underneath is just talking about how, in general, people of color have higher unmet financial needs when they're applying for college, and it's harder for them to stay in college due to financial situations that they're in. Here's another reason that we got here. There's very much in society this mindset, and it kind of um, comes down into the counseling arena as well, with guidance counselors in high schools and organizations, even in your families, where there's this idea of like 4-year college is like the end all be all of everything, right? And that if you don't do that, you're a failure. And that has really hampered the ability for students to make it ahead because, first of all, we know that not everyone wants or needs a 4-year college degree. Like career interests can be as diverse as people, right? And it's really not fair to try to have one size fits all kind of a personality philosophy. And we also know that in many regions, for example, I'll say in Boston, we know that a lot of sub-bachelor's level occupations pay actually very well and are very stable and pay more sometimes. So for example, if you want to become an electrician in Boston through the union, you're making way better money than I'm ever making now in my career, even though I have my master's degree. So the trades are a great example. There are also civil service type jobs. Some of the highest paying jobs in the Boston area are things like firefighter, police officer, right? Very stable jobs, and the building trades. And so we need to kind of open up our idea of what career paths are, right, for all young people. You can see here as well that associate's degree holders in computer and mathematical occupations have median lifetime earnings of $2.8 million, which is the exact same as median lifetime earnings for all bachelor's degree holders. So generally speaking, the more education you get, the more money you get paid. But in some cases, that's not always the case. There are certain jobs that require an associate's degree, especially in things like healthcare, computer, math, science, that pay more than folks who work in other areas with a bachelor's. And then, as you can see from that last stat, 28% of workers with an associate's degree earn more than half of workers with a bachelor's. We also see that, and this might be of particular interest to you all, that earnings differ significantly by your major of study. So you can see that the top occupations in terms of earnings over a lifetime are things like architecture and engineering, computers, mathematics, business, et cetera, physical sciences. And then you see some of the more humanities type programs towards the bottom. Now, this is not to make a judgment because I know this is also the School of Social Work and I'm trying to get kicked out. But it's just to point out that, certain majors are more, your major oftentimes is more important than where you study or the level of your degree, right? And that's really, it's also very important to think about that fact that people of color are very much underrepresented in a lot of these top earning occupations and fields, right? And that's problematic. And these are some other things I've kind of just noticed as I've gone around the country training counselors in this work is this is another problem that we have. I think in the counseling field, there's very much this idea that counselors or advisors, coaches, whatever you want to call them, whether they're in high schools or community-based organizations, are really afraid of dashing students' dreams if they start to talk about, like wages for certain occupations, or, if they say like, well, okay, you want to study the arts, but just so you know, this is what you would be making. It can be a hard conversation. And especially when counselors themselves are working in the education field and are part of that data, right? So that can be kind of iffy and weird. But I think, what I always try to tell counselors is that you don't want to dash students' dreams, but you also have to be real with them and be realistic about telling them like what it takes to get to certain occupations. Like if you're not getting A's or B's in science, it's going to be very, very difficult to get into a nursing program. That's just a fact. No matter how much you say you want to be a nurse. And so, okay, let's figure out how to work towards getting those grades right now. I always say we don't want to dash students' dreams, but we also don't want to sell them dreams. And that often happens with counselors, unfortunately. Also, we're seeing that what's being taught in undergrad oftentimes doesn't align with what's the skills that employers are looking for in our modern economy. And that's super problematic. And I'm sure some of you have kind of like heard this and, with friends of yours who've already graduated. I think about, for example, like computer science programs in colleges oftentimes don't teach things like coding and more practical things that a lot of employers are looking for. College curriculum, unfortunately, doesn't often keep up with the pace of the economy. And so that's why these coding boot camps have become so popular, right? Because they're able to like quickly change things in curriculum and get new professors and blah, blah, blah. And this has become a big problem, I think, for employers and for all of us. And then misconceptions, that sometimes they're misconceptions students have, sometimes they're misconceptions our families have, or just society in general. Like a lot of students still think like if I study something, I'm going to get a job in it for sure. And we all know that's not necessarily the case. We know lots of Uber drivers who are very well educated. Or this idea of like my passion, this kills me when they do this. Like, I'm so passionate about this. This is what I want to study. And I tell students, that's beautiful. But like, first of all, are you good at it? Because if you suck, then your passion doesn't matter, right? Not to be rude, but I'm just saying this is how I talk to my son, which is why my husband calls me a dream shatter. Anyway, so there's that. But also, right, and how do I work up to get to that skill level if that's what I really want? But also, like, you do have to make considerations. It's a financial investment, your post-secondary education, about like what money you're going to be making, what debt you're taking out, right? It's not just about passion. And I tell my students all the time, passion gets really old if you can't feed yourself. Real old, you know? Like if I were doing my passion, I'd be like taking care of dogs and making jewelry like in some farm somewhere. But here I am. The other thing is, a lack of structured paths from college to careers. Like there are certain paths that we know are very like clear, right? Like you want to go to medical school, here's what you do. But other paths, like you study psychology, or you study history, what are you going to end up doing, right? And so, and a lot of young people think that, if they veer too much, they're totally lost, or, it can be a very confusing process. And then, as I mentioned in this last diagram chart, there are fewer students of color in higher paying majors, which again contributes to the racial wealth gap, and role models of color in higher paying careers, right? So like if you don't see something, if you don't see yourself represented in something, a lot of times you're less likely to be part of it. Or even on a college campus, if you're studying biology and you don't have a lot of professors of color to mentor you or to talk with you, that can also kind of dissuade people from getting into the major. Or continuing with it. And then finally, we all know that unfortunately, wage gaps still persist in terms like sort of along, gender and racial lines, right? Those things haven't gone away, unfortunately. So I'm here to talk about how as a country, we really need to reinvent the way that we deliver career guidance and development services to underserved youth. Because of all of these problems I just mentioned, right? Like we're looking at things way too narrowly and we're not being real. And that's really important. And more strategic advising can really make a huge impact, right? But first, we have to fill some really big information gaps. So let me ask you all this: like, when you were in high school, how many of your guidance counselors talked to you about like what jobs paid, if you were interested in careers, or whether they were in demand in your region or not? Raise your hand if that happened. One. Wow. One person. Yeah. And since, I've been doing this work, that's pretty much the kind of, that's the percentage I usually get. But when you think about it, this is really important, right? Because most young people, most of us want to go on to post-secondary education because we want to get a good job. Like it would be cute if we were like, oh, I'm just intellectually curious. And so like, I just want to go to school for the sake of going to school, and for the cafeteria food. But at the end of the day, like most of us want to get a good job from it, right? And so it's really problematic, the fact that career and college advisor, post-secondary advising doesn't include these things, right? So there's like no easy tool for young people or their counselors to explore, for example, like what all their career and post-secondary options are, right? They don't have information on how to navigate the labor market in your area. Like, for example, what jobs are in demand in your area, right? Like, will I have a job? Are there openings for what I'm studying when I graduate, right? That's kind of important to know. What level of education or training do you need, right, to get into that job? What does it pay, right? And as you all know, pay can vary significantly based on geography, right? So like what a nurse makes in Boston is significantly more than what a nurse would make in Jacksonville, Florida, for example, right? So it's important to know what the local information is, data is. Also, counselors and advisors just really like don't have the information they need to understand the wide range of post-secondary options. So things like the building trades, like how do you become an elevator constructor, for example, or a plumber with a union, or apprenticeships in biotech, or how to train to become a firefighter, those kinds of things, right? Like most counselors are super well versed in how to advise students into like liberal arts 4-year college programs, but if you ask them about like the trades, most of them have no idea how to talk with a student about that. And unfortunately, a lot of times counselors are the only people they're talking to about these decisions. So if the counselor doesn't know, then the student doesn't explore, then it doesn't happen, and that shouldn't be happening, right? And then finally, a lot of students don't understand which college majors lead to which jobs, right? Especially for some of the majors that are kind of more open and not so specific. Also, there's a dearth of information about the quality of programs, of post-secondary programs, and that's super important, right? And this like always gets to me because, for example, let's say you want to buy a car. If you want to buy a car, you have a consumer reports, right, that you can look at, where you can find all kinds of information on different features and makes and models of cars and the safety guidelines and how it performed on this and blah blah blah, right? But when it comes to college or other post-secondary pathways, there really isn't a ton of information on the program level, right? So like US News and World Report will do like a college list and it has all of these things, which has become, as you all know, kind of controversial. Um, but there is information for the institution, but not for the program itself. And it's really important, especially for low-income students who can't really afford to make a wrong choice financially, that they know what they're getting themselves into, right? And so I always say it's crazy to me how in this country we talk so much about financial literacy and how important it is for young people to understand like what's a mortgage and credit cards and all of this stuff. And actually, I don't know if y'all know, but a lot of states now, or a handful of states or more, are starting to require financial education as part of like high school graduation. But yet, when you think about it, like college or post-secondary education is one of the biggest, like most significant, consequential financial decisions you'll ever make. But nobody talks about like students being financially literate before they make it, right? I mean, it just blows my mind. Like, you can't rent a car until you're 21, but you can take out $90,000 in debt and be stuck with it, right? It just makes no sense to me. So there's no easy button when it comes to understanding the quality of programs. And then the result is horrible debt, right? Horrible, horrible debt that can hang over your head for a long time. I'm not trying to scare y'all, but I'm still. Um, and so such horrible debt that this is a meme that's going around. Like it's crazy. It's just crazy. And then this also happens way too often, right? Like students take more time, right? Like picking a song for a car ride than they do in thinking about what their post-secondary path is. Or a lot of times they'll be like, well, my friend's doing that. Or, we're all very much privy to like social pressures or what we see around us. I talk all the time about how low-income students oftentimes, having grown up in a low-income neighborhood myself that was like, you know, um, pretty diverse, but everyone was low income at the time. And again, very much a Latinx enclave. There were only certain kinds of jobs we knew about because those were the jobs we saw in that little part of our neighborhood. Like we didn't meet engineers or like journalists or, biotech folks. Like we didn't. So how could we even dream of having those careers if we've never seen them? Right. So that's something important to think about. And then unfortunately, all of this leads to very long-term negative consequences, right? So when you couple things like significant student loan debt with a low paying job and slow income growth, right? What do you get? You get the fact that you can't really save money for an emergency savings, right? Or to do things like invest. This is how people build wealth in the stock market, or to buy a home. And you can't build intergenerational wealth, right? Like we all know that part of building intergenerational wealth, that one of the best ways is to purchase property, right? And have it within your family. And so if you don't have the money to do that because you're crushed with student loan debt and you're not getting paid a lot at your job and your wage growth is like super slow and very sluggish, then none of this is going to happen. And this contributes to the racial wealth gap because we're even more behind as people of color. And so all of these data point to the importance really of being able to show students the labor market value of a post-secondary credential. Now, I want to be very clear about something. A lot of people have said to me when I talk about this that, I'm focusing too much on money, right? Like that, there's too much of a premium on like talking about wages and this is capitalist philosophy and blah, blah, blah. The reality is like, listen, I was broke growing up and like money matters, right? It's not the key to happiness. It's not like, what I'm saying, gonna like keep you warm at night, but it definitely like helps with a lot of things and definitely brings stress levels down and definitely gives you a sense of security. That's just a reality, whether we like it or not. And when you're talking about serving low income students who are falling farther and behind, farther and farther behind because of their debt, we need to talk about money, right? It shouldn't be something. And it's funny because there are some counselors who are still very hesitant to do that. They just don't want to broach the topic because it's sensitive. And, we have issues in the society talking about money anyway. Understandable. But to me, this is the number one thing that they need to be talking about before everything else. Like passion, that's great, that's cool. Like these should all be components of the conversation, but money has to be a part of it. So that's where my organization comes in. Like I said, I co-founded it several years ago. Next Gen Talent, our mission is to boost the labor market payoff of post-secondary credentials for low-income students, students of color, first-generation college goers. And what we really do is through our services, we revolutionize the field's approach, right, to career and post-secondary advising by making it more, number one, data-driven, like evidence-based, two, strategic, and three, more focused on guiding students into a well-paying job, because again, that's what most students are going to get their post-secondary education for, right? We enable advising and empower students to make more informed choices about a wider range of post-secondary career options. And we have this sort of like a suite of services. Our main services are these web-based tools that we have developed that empower advisors and students in grades 9 to 16 and their counselors that work with them to identify careers and post-secondary programs that have a strong labor market value in their particular region. We have a partnership with another nonprofit called Career Spring, which enables our students to access a career advisor form. So a lot of low-income students tend to not have the professional network, social capital that other students have. So through this, web tool, they're able to basically access all kinds of career advisors, professionals throughout the country, and they set up appointments and they can do one-off kind of volunteer work. The advisors, they can help them write resumes or review cover letters or just give them advice. And then Career Spring also offers a job board where students can find things like internships and job postings. I cannot overemphasize the importance of internships and work-related experience, especially for low-income students who don't have connections, because so many employers are looking for that, right? Like the academic piece is cool, but a lot of employers are like, I can teach you the technical skills, but I want you to have soft skills. And you learn those things when you're working on a job, in an internship, when you're, having to deal with people and, work in a team or communicate things or be reliable. Those are the things that employers are super, super concerned about, no matter what area, what industry they're in. And then finally, we provide customized training to advisors. So I do that training myself and other organizations on not only the use of our tools, but also our approach in general to counseling. These are some of the partners that we have been working with for the last few years, and they include high schools and college access and success organizations like One Goal, workforce development boards. So you see that little blue pick sign. So the Boston Private Industry Council is our workforce development board in Boston, and they're using our tools. And all of these partners, essentially, their counselors and students are using our tools. We work with them to integrate the tools into their curriculum, their advising programs, et cetera. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk with you about our specific tools. And then I'm super excited to have everybody ask me questions. But the first set of tools that Next Gen Talent provides through our partnerships are these labor market literacy tools. And from what you can see, this first tool that says where are the well-paying jobs in Boston, this tool is something that, again, counselors and students can use. You can see that you can filter by education level. So you can find right off the bat where the well-paying jobs are in Boston based on, let's say a student says, I'm looking for, I'm not thinking about doing a bachelor's right now. I'm thinking more like an associate's degree or certificate. You could filter by sub-bachelor's. Every colored circle you see in that chart, I know it's a little hard to see, sorry guys, represents a career area. And so once you click on those career areas, you can actually find the actual jobs, right? And you find not only like the job title, but also the education required to enter that job, the pay, the demand for that job, local wages, everything is super hyper localized. And for this particular tool, we do not include any jobs that pay less than 80% of the regional median. So we do have a cutoff, right? And we do that based on, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but MIT has this living wage calculator that this really cool professor put together. Oh, sorry. So we use that standard for a lot of our work. So it's very simple for counselors and students, again, to find, jobs that pay well off the bat. Now, again, jobs that are not in this tool, we're not saying they're not good jobs. We're not saying that, students shouldn't look at them. We're not dissuading them. We just want them to have the information that they need to be strategic and to make well-informed decisions. The second tool, and actually I should say, what's really cool about the first tool, we learn lessons every time we have folks using these tools, is that it's pretty easy to see, for example, like what career areas and what jobs are most popular and high demand, pay well in Boston. Obviously, Boston being Boston, IT is up there, right? Like finance, right? We also have trades that are really good options for folks. So it's really interesting, and a lot of counselors love this tool because they say that by touching on the filter, so for every educational level, every one that you go up, they can show students how you make more money generally as you get more education, and it's important for them to show students that visual. The second tool is career outcomes by major. This was a really interesting project. So we partnered with an organization called Burning Glass Technologies that does real-time labor market information. So they spider the web essentially and look at job postings like Monster, Indeed, and they look at what jobs employers are posting to see like how hot certain jobs are, what the salary is that they're offering, those kinds of things. And what was cool actually about this project with Burning Glass is that we basically surveyed, we had them look at 8 major Boston area public colleges. So not the super selective colleges, but the colleges that like 80% of Boston public school graduates would end up in, like a lot of the state schools, like the UMasses, et cetera, Framingham State, those places. And we asked them to basically, they looked at LinkedIn profiles of college graduates based on, so they were looking at their majors. So this tool essentially answers the question, what jobs can I get with with this major, with X major in this region? Like what jobs am I going to end up in, right? And so they looked at LinkedIn profiles to find that of students who graduated from these colleges. And then we created this tool so that students and counselors could very quickly see, what those jobs are. So I'll give you an example that was really interesting to me. So one is a lot of students are very interested in criminal justice, especially students who grew up where I did. Again, because we saw cops all the time and probation officers and blah, 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 and want to be helpful to society as much as possible. And so, that's a whole other debate. Don't get me started on that debate. That's complicated. What we found was that actually criminal justice majors, only 28% of them end up working in public safety and law after they graduate with a 4-year degree. And as you all know, most students who are trying to major in that want to be working in public safety and law. So it's not a great outcome. A lot of the rest of them will end up working in sales or business. And unfortunately, one of the biggest percentages of occupations they end up in is something like security officer, which you all probably know doesn't require any sort of degree, much less a bachelor's degree, and doesn't pay well. So in the Boston area, you're making like around $30,000 starting out in that job. So if you've graduated with a 4-year degree in criminal justice and you owe tens of thousands of dollars in student loans, it's not a great return on investment if you end up working as a security officer. Some others end up working as police officers, which actually also does not require a bachelor's degree. And in fact, majoring in criminal justice does not give you any advantage whatsoever when you're applying to the police academy in Boston. A lot of students don't realize that. In fact, I had a cop say to me, I think they'd rather see someone who majored in psychology than in criminal justice because they know how to think, how people's minds work and they're interested in that kind of thing. And we do a lot of like community relations and we have to be good communicators and blah, blah, blah. And so it's really interesting to hear those stories. Now, there are jobs, like if you want to be a criminal investigator or something like that, or certain other kinds of jobs where it makes sense to major in criminal justice and get a 4-year degree. But again, this is about being strategic, right? And so we want students to know this information and counselors so that they can make better decisions and provide better advising. Our other tool that we've developed is Navigator. It's a website that contains 2 different things. So the first is we decided that we wanted to sort of fill this information gap of not knowing the quality of programs out in our region, post-secondary programs. And so we did research in 2 different ways. So we identified programs, again, so everything from things like, an electrician's apprenticeship program in Boston to firefighter training to, let's say, like an associate's degree in HVAC, right, and heating and air conditioning, or an auto tech, to like a nursing program at a bachelor's level or mechanical engineering bachelor's, to a combined BS, MS, and social work. So we have all like that huge range of programs in Navigator. And what we did was we did a combination of internet research on the programs and then interviewed each program. program representative, to get information, very detailed information on program outcomes, things like suggestions for applicants, so you would have like inside tips on how to get in or be a stronger candidate for admission. And we learned a lot of really fascinating things. Right now, we're at about 175 programs here. They're all based in Boston, Greater Boston. We have like the UMasses, with the BCs, all of the different wonderful colleges that we have out there. But we also have things like short-term IT training through like a Europe program and things like that. What counselors and students really like about Navigator is you can see, you can filter the program. So let's say a student comes up to a counselor and says, I'm interested in healthcare, but I have like no idea what kind of program or what kind of job. You can filter by healthcare, career area, or you can filter by the name of an institution or the median salary once you've graduated, or other things, right? So there are lots of different ways to maneuver it and mess with it to get the data that you want. And so for each of those programs that you see on the screen, you would click on them, and that's where you would find this super detailed information. So it would include things like the admissions process, suggestions for applicants, which, again, we ask very specifically of program reps, which is not public information. We ask for things like, what's your program retention rate? What's your program completion rate? What's your employment rate, right, of grads? Where are they working? What is their starting salary? We have BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics wages in Boston tied to everything. So we have really, really interesting information that they can't find anywhere else, so that they can actually talk with students about the value of the program, right? Information on costs, median loan debt, et cetera, is all in there. And we get some of that information. We pull it in from College Scorecard and some other sources. But a lot of it is I'd say about half of it is information we get directly from interviews, which is why there is no other tool like this in the country, as far as we know. And we've learned a lot of really cool things about this. So for example, like nursing school, a lot of young people are interested in nursing school because it's a well-paying job. There are always jobs for it. It's always going to be needed. It's stable. We heard a lot from nursing schools who would say things like, when students are applying, they should make sure to not write super generic answers in the essays, like I want to help people, or, like I like old people, or whatever they say. That they need to be really specific about saying things like, last year I was a caregiver for my uncle, or, who knows if they make it up, but whatever. The point is they're being more specific, even if it's just made up. And so, being really specific when you're, and talking about how you could add to the culture of the school and the class of nurses, nursing students. We also, one thing that we ask, which I think is super important, is we ask about the student profile. So, for example, the profile of the accepted students, right? So it's one thing if you're a counselor to say, like, I can see for this nursing program, Jeremy, that you need a 3.5 to apply GPA. But we ask when we interview the programs, okay, so he needs a 3.5 to apply at least, but what is the typical GPA of students that actually get into the program? And what we're finding is that a lot of times for places like UMass Lowell, which is has a great nursing school, it's 4.0. And that's what I would want to tell my student is like, you got to get as close to the 4.0 as possible, or else we're just kind of like being average here. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, even though that's not average. So those are interesting things. I was really fascinated learning about the building trades because I myself knew very little about them. I don't know how many of you know much about getting into an apprenticeship program in the building trades, but it's pretty fascinating to see their processes, and it's very like mysterious if you've never been in that, right? Like you don't have an uncle who talks with you about plumbing or whatever. And we've gotten a lot of great tips from them as well. We found some really great programs that are accelerated programs or like combined, which is really important when you're talking about low income students, right? Because you want to save them time and money. So, and it's crazy to think that there are occupations out here where getting a bachelor's degree is like, once you finish that, you still can't work in the profession. You have to then go to grad school, take out more debt to work in it, right? So like we found places where you can like get a combined, like I said, bachelor's and master's in social work, right? Or physical therapy, because you're gonna need extra education on top of the bachelor's, and it's a long haul, right? And it can be very expensive. So those are really important. But we've learned a lot of great things. We've also learned, for example, like I think y'all have probably heard there are a lot of new, like, again, coding boot camps that are popping up everywhere. And people think that they're all just like, the next best thing. And what we found is that we were only able to include a very small percentage of the ones that are out there, because a lot of the ones that actually exist, you really need to have some experience, even if it's just as a hobby. You have to have some knowledge of computers, of IT, of coding, or not coding necessarily, but have had that interest. to pass a lot of their tests to even get into the program. And a lot of young people don't realize that, right? That they're competing with folks like that. So, and you have to make sure that they have a really strong employer connection. There are a lot of these like small little like community-based, pop-up type employment programs that, they look good on the outside and they're well-intentioned, but they really don't have the connections to employers that they need to make sure that students actually get a job after they're done training. I'm going the wrong way. So at the end of the day, for me, this is really about sort of tackling poverty, like from this angle, which I don't think a lot of us think about, right? Which is we need to provide students with the data that they need to make more informed post-secondary and career decisions. And we know that that can then help lift and keep them out of poverty, right? Because they'll be able to build wealth if they have well-paying careers, if they're able to take that kind of path. And I just wanted to say at the end, oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say at the end that I'm really glad to be here with all of you. I thank you for the time to talk with you. I'm super excited to hear your questions. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I think honestly, like again, just my final point, when it comes to this issue, it's particularly important when we're trying to help and empower low-income students, students of color, first-generation college goers, because it's a very risky thing to take out a lot of loans and just not know, right, what's coming up. And I think it's something that, they definitely literally can't afford to make a bad choice. And as a society, we can't afford to let them continue. Thank you very much.
What questions do we have for Norma? One question
Don't be shy.
One question that came in online was, does this exist just in Boston or are there other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, whoever asked that. It does only exist just in Boston. I'm currently looking for some opportunities to get funding to work in other places. I would love to create these things in Detroit. Actually, I think there's a lot of appetite for it. But yes, for now it's just Boston. It's just NextGen is the only organization that I know of that's doing this kind of work.
Great, thank you. Thanks for doing it.
Yes, please, and I'll come out. That's okay. Let me shimmy back.
Hello, my name is Adil.
Hello.
And my question is that a lot of stuff that you are doing is directed towards the demand side, like tailoring the demands of the students or employees. Are there any?
I'm sorry, could you just speak a little louder?
A lot of stuff that you are doing is towards the demand side, like tailoring the demand of the students and job seekers. Are there any programs that are directed towards the supply side, like we're supplying those programs that are beneficial for the society in those areas? Like you talked about, if plumbing is good for society, then supply side should also be putting those programs in those societies, not only the demand side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one really cool thing that folks are starting to do, and you're absolutely right, the onus shouldn't just be on one side, is I've seen a lot of counseling programs that are a little bit more advanced in terms of having this wider philosophy on post-secondary pathways and not just college, start to introduce employers into the classroom and take a look at curriculum, for example, or talk about the idea of, like, for example, pre-apprenticeship programs, which are super important. Programs can be very difficult to get into. And a lot of times students, once you commit to an apprenticeship program, it can be kind of hard to not to get out, but it's a commitment. And so pre-apprenticeship programs are really important. But I think you're seeing a lot more of our side, of the education side, trying to bring in the voice of employers to tell us, right, like what we need to be doing. And I think that's absolutely right. And I'm seeing, for example, like at, like college fairs or like, fairs at school, that they'll invite like the training director from the plumbing apprenticeship to come in and talk with students so that they're at the table when things are being designed and advising is happening. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's one thing I've seen.
Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
We all like hear the sentiment that like the master's is the new bachelor's. I was just wondering what your thinking is on like that kind of rhetoric and how it kind of perpetuates what you've already been talking about.
Absolutely. And it's a great point. It's a great question because in Boston, especially, there's so much degree inflation. There are jobs that they're asking for masters where you clearly do not need a master's to do the work. And we all know, like with most jobs, you learn what you do on the job, a lot of it on the job, right? Or from jobs you had before. It's not so much that you came with that knowledge. I think it's incredibly dangerous that this is happening. And it's funny because we're very unique in this way, like as a country. I mean, you look at places like Europe, and apprenticeships are like the norm, like a lot of folks, and it's not considered lesser work. It's considered very dignified work. People take pride in a craft and knowing that there's a demand for it. So it's a very dangerous philosophy. And again, and something I could have put up as a bullet. We're just like pushing higher and higher and forgetting that they're like people who aren't really into academics necessarily, right? Like, who like to work with their hands more. My son is an example of that. And I remember he actually came up to me last year, his senior year of high school, and he was like, Mo, he's like, I'm a little worried because I wanted to tell you I'm not that interested in college. I was looking at websites with him and different programs that he could, might think about applying to. And he was like, but none of it really speaks to me. Like, I like working with my hands. Like, I want to see what I'm making at the end of the day. I'm just not that person. And I was like, that's okay. And I felt bad, even in my work, that my son thought that I might be somehow disappointed, luckily he knows I'm not. And now he's actually in the electrician apprenticeship program. I actually use Navigator with him and he's had his friends using it. But no, it's a very dangerous thing. It's pulling us in a very bad direction. It's leaving a lot of people behind unnecessarily. It's unethical in my opinion. Absolutely. Yes.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Where do you get the financial support to grow this program, and what can we as students at University of Michigan do to help grow this program?
That's one. Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm like so excited. Thank you for asking that. I mean, this is what I'm thinking, right? So right now we have some foundation supporting us. So Wellington Management Foundation gave us our seed money to start out, but we've gotten grants from the Balfour Foundation. These are all like Massachusetts-based. The Shaw Family Foundation. But we actually now have started to charge for our tools as like yearly subscription fees to clients. But I do think that in the future, if I were to bring something like this to Detroit, for example, like I would love to have graduate students like you doing the research for the Navigator tool. So like calling the programs, like what I do, have you guys doing it to call and ask the questions and have the protocols, like what's your graduation rate, like who's hiring, those things, like give me some inside tips on admission. To have a team of students to help me with that would be amazing. It's, the technology is not that difficult. Like the labor market literacy reports are all on Tableau, which is a public website. And we have an IT guy helping us with that. Navigator we built from scratch, but like we have it built. So now it's just a matter of finding a city where we can get some support with funding, and then setting up the research, finding out like where are the programs, calling them, inputting them into Salesforce, which then goes into Navigator. So like we have a lot of the setup ready. I just need the help. So yeah, I definitely would love to, if anyone knows of any funders who would be interested, I'd love to talk with you and any students who would be interested in studying this and helping me. I would love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great question. That warmed my heart today.
So,
Hello.
So I want to thank you.
Sure.
This is actually very interesting to me because it crosses over into a little bit of research I'm doing for paper. But aside from that, I am a business student. So I'm actually here trying to, I should say, as this sort of speaker series is sponsored by Business Plus Impact. I'm wondering how you think you can also integrate this with the sort of business side. I know you talk about foundations and things like that, but like
Absolutely.
funding from business, I feel like could also be. Or I'm wondering what your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And we've talked about that, but possibly finding like corporate sponsors for some of our tools, especially because part of what we're trying to do is make sure that students are better prepared to be in the workforce and to be, good workers and reliable workers. And so we have talked quite a bit actually about this idea. I think right now, the last few years we've been kind of like building up our tools and beta testing them, but I think that's our next step is to start to think about like there are a lot of different stakeholders here and we're not taking advantage of all of them, and we need to start thinking about that. And that they're the ones who have the resources that other places sometimes don't. So I would love to talk with you more about that. That would be great.
I'm Leon Linderman, and I'm a graduate of School of Social Work way back in
Hello.
'86. I'd like to get your reaction to a couple of thoughts I had. The passion is a great motivator. You don't want to ignore it or minimize it.
That's right. Mhm.
And it can be combined with success
Mhm.
in a career choice, both financially and otherwise. That would be the ideal.
Absolutely.
Not always achievable, you're right.
Mhm.
Also, and this has been a long-term problem in our society. I worked on it in my own way with job clubs and job recruitment in this Department of Social Services back in the early 80s. The idea of preparation is very complex for success,
Mhm.
and it has something to do with family influence as well, family support,
Sure.
not only accurate career choices. And I've thought about this, and I think some schools may be doing it, and that is offer what am I thinking of? Internships
Mhm.
for students very early on, where they can sample for themselves where they fit, where their passion is, and where whether it fits their income ambitions or not.
Mhm.
They may not be that interested in income. And one more, if I could think of what I was considering. Yeah, well, if you can respond to those two, I guess I'd be satisfied. In the meantime, I could think about what else I wanted to say.
Sure. No, you're
if there's
absolutely
time.
right. And again, we're not trying to downplay the importance of liking what you do or having an interest in it. I think that it's very rare that you'll find a low income family or student who isn't interested in like income requirements especially because they're going to be taking on loans, generally speaking, and very high level of loans especially for a 4-year degree. So it is a consideration. And I think actually students are way ahead of us on this. I think like when I interview students, a lot of them say to me, like, I like this, but I need to make sure I can pay back my loans because I've already heard stories from my friends who are still paying 30 years later and they got private loans and they're predatory loans or, they're paying super high interest rates and they're never going to pay this thing off. And, with all of this talk of the president and his policy around loan forgiveness, I think this is such a buzz conversation right now. But I agree with you. There has to be a balance. I think the reason I bring it up income so much is partially because of the work I do, but also because the bias in counseling right now is not to talk about that. It's more to talk about passion, and passion is great, but again, you have to have skill as well, and you have to work on that. Most people, you can have talent naturally, but there's also some level of skill you need. And a lot of times, being young, when you're young, sometimes you don't realize all of the various like facets of what you're considering, right? And the passion can kind of like sway. And that's why things like internships, that's why I said that earlier, are so important because you really don't know what something is about. You could read all kinds of like profiles, talk to a career advisor or a mentor until you're doing the work or seeing it live. You don't really know what it's about day to day. So I agree with you. I think we need to invest a lot more in internships in this country, way more, and start out earlier, like you said, and start talking about careers like in middle school. And not because students are going to decide, but just to have them explore and understand. I always say, like, it can be kind of dangerous to, I think, even sometimes use the word career with students because I think it scares them. It's like, oh, if I pick this, then I'm stuck. And I always say, like, don't think about it that way. Think about, like, what's the first job you want on your, like, path to a career, even if you don't know what that is yet. Like, what's the first job that would be interesting? And I think getting experience in something like on the ground through an internship is the best way to figure that out. Absolutely. Yes.
So I want to kind of piggyback off of the internships.
Yeah.
I remember talking with someone who stopped doing nursing because bachelor is the new master's. They think just because they were did more schooling than she did, that they knew more, but we teach a lot of theory, not a lot of practicality. So
Right.
internships is very good.
That's right.
But I also want to kind of bring it back to some exploitive natures that internships can have.
Mhm.
Particular, I don't want to talk about the post-secondary because that's kind of a landmine career-wise. But on the secondary side, the teenagers,
Mhm.
I know a friend who is a child social worker, and one thing that he was trained was to look out for worker exploitation using the guise of unpaid internships.
Sure.
So
Yep.
I don't know if that is something that you have come across, something that you had to tackle when you're going through this advising.
Oh, absolutely. And I always tell my students, if it's not paid, you're not doing it. That's it. We'll find something else. It definitely has happened quite a bit. There's a lot of talk about that and a lot of consciousness around that, especially when it comes to low income students who really need the money during the summer or whatever in between, college years or whatever. And so, no, that is definitely something that's been on the radar of the field quite a bit. And it's harder to find that. Well, at least out there a lot. And students again are becoming smarter about this stuff. They're learning from the community-based organizations that are working with them or their advisors on looking for paid internships as much as possible.
Probably have time for about 3 more questions.
So I was wondering how you think that this sort of approach ties into recently with like the talk about student loans. We've been also, or people, research has also been looking into income-driven repayment plans for student loans. Like I know you're talking about people who are paying like 20 years into their 20 years into their student loans. They still haven't paid them down. They're not getting close, right?
Mhm.
So how do you think this actually ties into that sort of student loan approach versus like career approach?
I mean, I think I'm going to be honest. I mean, I don't really study that so much, but I think that again, young people are hip to what's going on. They have friends who've already graduated who are working as Uber drivers with a master's degree or working like. Let me point this other issue out that I think a lot of people don't talk about that we need to is that thank goodness, right? We have had activism around lower wage jobs, like in food service, for example, right? And because of that activism, now you have jobs at like Starbucks where you can make $20 an hour starting out, right? And get some benefits. And so can be very difficult sometimes to then convince a young person to go do an associate's degree where they're going to end up in a job where they get $18 an hour and had to invest 2 years of time. Whereas with Starbucks, they don't have to do that, right? So like that's a big issue is how we deal with that. I was just talking with Mara because I have health problems and I go to the pharmacy way too often. And like, it's very difficult to find pharmacy technicians right now because it's a super stressful job. You get yelled at all day. And, they're getting paid like $17, $18 an hour where they could go work at, like a food shop and make more, right? And not deal with like that kind of, there are different levels of stress. But I think to be honest, a lot of young people are starting to hear those stories of those of us who still 20 years later are still trying to pay things down and saying like, let me rethink this or let me find a faster way to the career that I want, right? Like, let me look at an accelerated program or, let me look at coupling, like this degree with this experience because nowadays employers are actually saying that a lot of them are more interested in looking at your skill set than your degrees. And that's the trend, right? Like a lot of them are still unfortunately biased towards a college degree, but they're starting to say in surveys more and more that they're realizing that the academic piece is not always giving them the candidate that they want. So they're starting to open up their minds a little bit more to that.
Do you have any information about the impact of using your tools on the population? Like, do people make more money starting? Do they make more money 10 years in?
Yeah, so we're very new, and we just finished beta testing our tools last year. So we don't have information. Like students are just graduating and going into post-secondary programs. But we do look forward to tracking that in the future. But we are seeing, for example, that we saw a very big uptick in students who were interested in enrolling and starting to enroll in non-college pathways. So one of our high schools said that it was like 35% of their students, whereas before it was maybe like 17, 18, we're looking at things like the building trades apprenticeships or short-term IT training, or training to become, a firefighter, things like that. And so we're definitely seeing that students are feeling more at ease, and not, and like, it's just as good a path for them because counselors can talk with them about it and they can show them what the returns are. So we're definitely seeing that impact. We're seeing a lot of students who are changing their majors, or like making them minors instead, based on the information that we have in that second labor market literacy tool. So we're starting to see some real, and counselors themselves, like we're seeing a huge impact with counselors because they feel like they're just better informed. And so now they can give students better information and they're feeling way more confident in their work, which we love to see. And it's so important because they're not getting that training. Like to get certification to be a post-secondary counselor, you don't need to know about this kind of career and post-secondary advising. They focus more on like mental health. And that actually in policy should change, I think. I love all these questions. Thanks, guys. This makes me happy. I was worried that nobody was going to ask me and I'd have to look at Mara and be like, girl, ask me something.
I guess first things first, thanks for being here.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for putting your full weight, I guess, behind this, the organization that you've started as well. I'm also an MBA, and me sitting in this room, the only reason I'm here is because I was actually able to take advantage of different resources very similar to what you're starting here, like Inroads and
Excellent.
Consortium and School for Advanced Studies down in Florida. So
Right.
this type of stuff is extremely personal to me and important.
Mhm.
Oh, sure, sorry. But one thing I wanted to ask is that I think you've pinpointed, I guess, the root cause of this issue is basically gaps of information not being provided to students within high school or in undergrad. But this this gap information has existed since I was in high school, like 23 years ago.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's the
So,
problem. Yeah.
yeah. And why is that? Why hasn't that gap been addressed? Why are counselor requirements still so low? Why don't they have this information when it's obviously probably the most important resources they can provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to give you like the probably non-PC answer. I'll tell you, like, when I try to research programs for Navigator, like I call the programs myself, and now I have a consultant who helps me with that work. It's a very political thing to get outcomes information from programs. Programs are very afraid to look bad, right? Like if their completion rate isn't a certain percentage, or their employment rate doesn't look as good as like, maybe for a different program in a similar area, it can expose programs. And, certain training institutions want to keep their reputation. They want to, right? And so some of it is that, I think. I think some of it is this very arduous work, honestly. And I think, the pandemic was a really interesting event when it comes to this, because at the same time that we started to think about how important mental health is and making sure, because counselors were really dealing so much more with that during the pandemic for obvious reasons, right? Like putting out fires and dealing with depression and anxiety and all the things we all have at this point. But I think, it also like really solidified for young people that like they have to make good choices when it comes to like their post-secondary choice is an investment. Like think of it as an investment. It's not just like, oh, this is my next step in life. Like this is a major financial decision. And I think because a lot of them were seeing like industries disappearing that people had studied for years to get into, right? Or like, a lack of jobs in certain places or requirements changing, that they were like, I really need to rethink this. But I think it's a combination of a lot of factors. And I think some of it is institutions being afraid of being called on what their results are.
Let's thank Norma for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, guys.
Concludes our series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. And good luck with the rest of the year. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.